The hum of the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was a lullaby to Jalen. A symphony of rolling suitcases, chattering families, and the distant roar of jet engines, a familiar comfort that eased the tightness in his chest. Gate B-19 was his usual haunt, a strategic point offering an unobstructed view of the tarmac. He perched on a vacant seat, his legs swinging, oblivious to the restless energy swirling around him. In his lap lay his worn notebook, its pages filled with meticulous sketches and notes. Today's subject, the Delta 737-900ER, gleaming white against the cerulean backdrop. He traced the contours of the wing with his pencil, annotating the subtle curve of the winglets. Increased lift, reduced drag. He murmured under his breath, the words a tangible link to the physics he devoured in his spare time. He was lost, adrift in a world of thrust and lift coefficients, bypass ratios, and the intricate dance of air molecules. Captain Meredith Langford, on the other hand, felt the airport's thrum as a dissonant chord, a constant reminder of the tight schedule and the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. Her flight, 2294 to Chicago, was delayed, the announcement echoing through the gate like a mournful sigh. Impatience gnawed at her, a familiar companion. She scanned the waiting area, a sea of faces blurring into anonymity. Her gaze snagged on a lone figure near the window, a young boy hunched over a notebook. Something about him, something felt off. He wasn't with anyone. No family, no luggage. Just him and his notebook. And the way he stared at the plane's intense, unwavering. A ripple of unease disturbed the placid surface of her routine observation. It wasn't logical, she knew. Plenty of people watched planes. It was a marvel, after all, this heavy machinery defying gravity. But still, the nagging feeling persisted. It clung to her like the humid Texas air. His dark skin, his close-cropped hair, the way he seemed so separate from the bustle around him. These details, innocuous on their own, coalesced into a disquieting image in her mind. Her thoughts recoiled from the direction they were taking, whispering accusations she didn't want to acknowledge. She'd seen enough news reports, heard enough cautionary tales. Better safe than sorry. A voice in her head urged, cold and insistent. The thought settled heavy in her stomach, a sour taste on her tongue. But what if? The question hung in the air, a silent accusation. She glanced at her watch, the ticking seconds amplifying her unease. Jalen, oblivious to the scrutiny he was under, adjusted his position, shifting to get a better view of the ground crew loading cargo. The precise choreography of their movements, the intricate ballet of machinery, fascinated him. He added another sketch to his notebook, a quick impression of the cargo loader, its hydraulic arm extended like a mechanical limb. He was lost in the details, the small intricacies that revealed the hidden elegance of the machine. He hadn't noticed the woman watching him. He hadn't noticed the way her eyes lingered, the subtle shift in her posture, the tightening of her jaw. His world was contained within the pages of his notebook, within the precise lines and calculations that brought order to the chaos of the airport. Meredith took a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of jet fuel and stale coffee. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone. She knew she should look away, mind her own business. But the image of the lone boy, so intently focused on the aircraft, refused to dissipate. It was a puzzle piece that didn't fit, a jarring note in the familiar airport symphony. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, her voice barely audible above the din. But the words felt hollow, unconvincing even to her own ears. The unease remained, a persistent hum beneath the surface of her thoughts. What was the harm in a quick call? Just a precaution. She dialed the number for airport security, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. "Airport security, this is Captain Langford, flight 2294. Her voice was tight, betraying her internal conflict. "I just noticed a young male, possibly early teens, alone by the window near Gate B-19. She paused, searching for the right words that wouldn't reveal the prejudice coloring her perception. "Something feels off." The words hung in the air, charged with an unspoken meaning. The security officer on the other end responded with practiced calm, asking for further details. As Meredith provided a description of Jalen, his height, his clothes, the notebook in his lap, a wave of shame washed over her. She saw herself through the eyes of the officer, through the eyes of the boy she was reporting, and she recoiled from the reflection. What was she doing? Was this who she was? A woman driven by fear and suspicion, projecting her anxieties onto an innocent child? The questions pounded in her head, a relentless drumbeat against the rising tide of regret. But the words were already spoken, the wheels set in motion. And as she hung up the phone, a cold dread settled in her stomach, a premonition of the storm that was about to break. The hum of the airport, a constant thrum of activity, faded into the background of Jalen's concentration. He meticulously sketched the wingspan of a departing 747, his brow furrowed in concentration. Numbers and calculations filled the margins of his notebook, a testament to his burgeoning passion. Lift, drag, thrust, the words echoed in his mind, a silent mantra to the gods of aviation. He barely registered the shadow that fell across his page, the sudden coolness that replaced the sun's warmth on his face. Two uniformed figures materialized, their presence looming large. Jalen's pencil stilled, the graphite hovering just above the paper. He looked up, his wide, curious eyes meeting the stern gaze of the officers. A flicker of confusion danced across his features. Did I do something wrong? He wondered, his stomach tightening with a knot of unease. He'd been so engrossed in his observations, so lost in the world of flight, he hadn't noticed anything amiss. "Excuse me, son," the taller officer began, his voice firm but not unkind. "We received a report of suspicious activity near this gate. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Jalen swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. Suspicious? Him? He'd only been watching the planes, the same way he'd done countless times before. He glanced nervously at his notebook, the pages filled with diagrams and equations. Would they understand? Would they see his passion or misinterpret his innocent curiosity? Before Jalen could answer, a voice cut through the air, sharp and protective. "Excuse me, what's going on? He's just sitting here." Tasha Porter, Jalen's mother, strode towards them, her expression a mix of concern and defiance. She'd just returned from the restroom, her heart sinking when she didn't see Jalen at their agreed-upon spot. The sight of two officers questioning her son sent a wave of protectiveness washing over her. She placed herself between Jalen and the officers, her body a shield. The shorter officer, a woman with tired eyes, addressed Tasha. "We received a report of suspicious activity near the gate, ma'am. Just doing a routine check." Her tone was professional, yet there was an underlying tension, a subtle shift in her stance that suggested this was more than routine. "Suspicious." Tasha's voice rose, a tremor of anger lacing her words. "You're talking about a 12-year-old boy with a notebook." She gestured towards Jalen, her eyes blazing. How dare they? How dare they look at my son, my brilliant, curious boy, and see a threat? The thought pulsed through her mind, a hot surge of anger. The air thickened with unspoken accusations. The murmur of the airport faded as bystanders, drawn by the unfolding scene, began to observe. The clicking of phone cameras, the whispers, the silent stares, all amplified the sense of scrutiny. Tasha felt a cold dread creep up her spine. This was it, the moment she had always feared, the moment her son's innocent passion would be misinterpreted, twisted into something sinister. Jalen, caught between his mother's protective stance and the officer's questioning gazes, felt a wave of shame wash over him. He shrank back, wishing he could disappear. The notebook in his lap suddenly felt heavy, incriminating. Why didn't I just stay home? He thought, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of the stares, the judgment in the silence. The taller officer, sensing the escalating tension, took a step back, his hand instinctively going to his belt. He cleared his throat, his voice softening slightly. "Ma'am, we understand your concern. We just need to verify a few things. Can we see what your son is working on?" Tasha hesitated, her protective instincts screaming at her to refuse. But she also saw the genuine confusion in the officer's eyes, the flicker of uncertainty that mirrored her own. She knew that resisting would only escalate the situation, further solidifying the suspicion hanging heavy in the air. With a deep breath, she nodded, her voice tight. "Jalen, show them your notebook." Jalen, his hands trembling slightly, opened the notebook to the page he'd been working on. The intricate diagram of the 747's wing, the meticulous calculations, the neatly labeled parts, lay exposed under the officer's scrutiny. A silence descended, broken only by the distant announcements echoing through the terminal. The taller officer leaned in, his gaze scanning the page. His brow furrowed, then slowly relaxed. He glanced at his partner, a silent communication passing between them. The female officer stepped closer, her expression softening. "Son, these are impressive. You understand a lot about airplanes, huh?" Jalen, still reeling from the whirlwind of emotions, managed a small nod. "I want to be a pilot," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the airport's hum. The officers exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to understanding. The tension in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of shared realization. They saw not a potential threat, but a young boy with a dream. Tasha, watching the transformation in their faces, felt a wave of relief wash over her. She reached down and squeezed Jalen's hand, her silent reassurance a balm to his wounded pride. The cameras continued to click, but their meaning had changed. They were no longer capturing a scene of suspicion, but a moment of connection, a testament to the power of understanding. The hum of the airport, once a backdrop to tension and fear, now resonated with a newfound hope. The fluorescent lights of Gate B-19 hummed a dull, monotonous tune, reflecting off the polished tile floor. The air, thick with the recycled scent of jet fuel and fast food, carried a low murmur of conversations, punctuated by the occasional chime of a boarding announcement. Tasha Porter smoothed down the front of Jalen's navy blue t-shirt, her fingers lingering on the embroidered airplane patch. It was a gift from his father, a small token of encouragement for a dream that now felt tainted, heavy with the weight of unwarranted suspicion. "He just loves airplanes," she thought, her stomach clenching again. He was just watching, like he'd done countless times before, eyes wide with wonder, tracing the graceful lines of each aircraft with an invisible finger. "Why?" The question echoed in her mind, sharp and bitter. "All right, ma'am." The officer's voice, even and professional, pulled her back to the present. He unclipped his radio from his belt, a small metallic click that sounded amplified in the sudden lull of conversation around them. "You're free to go." He avoided her eyes, his gaze settling somewhere on the departure board, where destinations blinked and scrolled, promising escape to places far removed from this sterile, brightly lit purgatory. "Like I said, ma'am," the second officer added, his tone apologetic, yet somehow detached, "we were just following up." He offered a small, tight-lipped smile, the kind meant to convey reassurance, but only served to deepen the chasm of misunderstanding that stretched between them. Tasha nodded curtly, the words of gratitude catching in her throat. What was there to be grateful for? That they hadn't hauled her son away? That they'd finally acknowledged his innocence after subjecting him to this humiliating ordeal? Jalen stood beside her, small and silent, clutching his well-worn copy of Jane's All the World's Aircraft. His usual vibrant energy seemed to have retreated, replaced by a quiet stillness that worried her more than any outburst of anger or tears. He hadn't spoken a word since the officers approached, his usual stream of questions about wingspans and engine thrust replaced by an unnerving silence. She saw the confusion in his eyes, the subtle flicker of hurt that he tried so hard to mask. It was a look she knew all too well, the look of a child forced to confront the harsh realities of a world that didn't always see him for who he was. As they turned to leave, a hushed voice cut through the air. "This is ridiculous." Tasha glanced towards the speaker, a woman with tired eyes and a toddler clinging to her leg. The woman quickly averted her gaze, but the words hung in the air, a small crack in the facade of normalcy that the airport so diligently maintained. Tasha felt a surge of gratitude for this small act of solidarity, a flicker of warmth in the cold, impersonal space. Someone saw, she thought. Someone understands. But the moment of shared indignation was fleeting. Unbeknownst to those present, the incident had already escaped the confines of Gate B19. A bystander, their phone held discreetly aloft, had captured the entire exchange, the officers questioning Jalen, Tasha's frantic explanations, the boy's quiet bewilderment. The video, shaky and grainy, was uploaded to social media with a caption that dripped with righteous anger. 12-year-old black boy harassed by airport security for wait for it watching planes. The internet, a vast and volatile ecosystem, reacted with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. The video spread, replicating itself across platforms, gathering momentum with each share and retweet. Within minutes, Airport Jilin was trending, a digital rallying cry against racial profiling. Comments poured in, a torrent of outrage, disbelief, and support. Some questioned the pilot's motives, digging into her social media profiles, searching for evidence of prejudice. Others shared their own stories of similar encounters, their voices amplified by the collective chorus of anger. The incident, once confined to the sterile confines of Gate B19, had exploded into the public consciousness. Tasha, oblivious to the online storm brewing around her son, guided Jalen through the crowded terminal. She felt the weight of unseen eyes, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. People whispered, pointed, their phones held aloft, capturing images of the boy who had become, in a matter of minutes, a symbol of injustice. She tightened her grip on Jalen's hand, her protective instincts kicking in. "Don't worry, baby," she murmured, her voice a shield against the whispers and stares. "We're going home." Jalen, lost in his own world of hurt confusion, didn't respond. The vibrant world of aviation, a world he'd always viewed with boundless enthusiasm, now felt tinged with a bitterness he couldn't quite comprehend. He looked down at the worn cover of his book, the image of a soaring F-22 Raptor now mocking his shattered dreams. Would he ever be able to look at an airplane again without remembering this feeling? He wondered. The thought, heavy and unwelcome, settled in his chest, a dark cloud obscuring the bright blue sky of his aspirations. The irony, of course, was lost on 12-year-old Jalen. He didn't know that at that very moment, miles away in Washington, D.C., his father, Dr. Emory Porter, was receiving a phone call that would inextricably link their family's private pain to the national conversation unfolding online. A phone call that would thrust them into the harsh glare of the public spotlight, and ultimately give Jalen's quiet passion a voice it never could have imagined. The muted hum of the hotel air conditioner fought a losing battle against the rhythmic whoosh of Phoenix traffic outside. Jalen sat perched on the edge of the double bed, his small frame swallowed by the oversized pillows. He traced the swirling pattern of the hotel carpet with his finger, the muted blues and greens a stark contrast to the vibrant images of airplanes that still danced behind his eyelids. The airport, a place of wonder just hours before, now held a sour taste in his memory. He picked at a loose thread on the bedspread, a small, nervous habit his mother knew all too well. Tasha Porter watched her son from the armchair by the window, her heart a tight knot in her chest. She had seen that same withdrawn look on his face before, the one that masked a confusion he couldn't yet articulate. It was the look he wore when his classmates snickered at his worn-out sneakers, or when the teacher overlooked him during class discussions. A look that spoke of a world that didn't quite understand him, a world that sometimes felt hostile, even when it didn't mean to be. She wanted to reach out, to smooth away the worry etched onto his young brow, but the words caught in her throat. How did you explain to a 12-year-old boy, a boy who loved the world with an open heart, that sometimes the world didn't love him back in the same way? The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The orange glow of the setting sun painted stripes across the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like a lifetime since they'd been at the airport, Jalen's eyes bright with excitement, his notebook clutched in his hand, eager to document the different types of aircraft taking off and landing. That innocent joy had been shattered, replaced by a cold, bewildering encounter with suspicion and distrust. Finally, Jalen's quiet voice broke the stillness. "I don't get it. I wasn't doing anything." The words were barely a whisper, laced with a confusion that tugged at Tasha's heartstrings. She pushed herself out of the chair and knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his knee. "I know, baby. I know you weren't." Her voice was soft but firm. She looked into his eyes, searching for the spark that usually burned there, the spark of curiosity and boundless enthusiasm. It flickered dimly, like a candle flame threatened by a draft. "Some people," she began, choosing her words carefully, "some people see what they want to see, not what's really there." Jalen looked down, his fingers still toying with the bedspread. He thought about the pilot, the way her eyes had narrowed when she saw him, the way her voice had tightened when she spoke to security. He hadn't understood then, but a seed of understanding, bitter and unwelcome, was beginning to sprout within him. He'd seen that look before, a veiled unease that sometimes flickered in the eyes of shopkeepers when he entered their stores, or the subtle tightening of grips on purses when he walked past on the street. He'd always dismissed it, attributed it to his own imagination, his own insecurities. But now, the pilot's face, etched with suspicion, superimposed itself over those other fleeting memories, forming a disturbing pattern. "But I was just watching the planes," he mumbled, his voice thick with unshed tears. The injustice of it burned in his chest. He hadn't been doing anything wrong. He'd been indulging his passion, a passion so pure and innocent that it felt almost sacred to him. The airport, with its constant hum of activity and the promise of flight, was his sanctuary, his place of escape. Now, even it felt tainted, marked by the shadow of an accusation he didn't understand. Tasha pulled him close, wrapping her arms around him. She felt his small body tremble against hers, and her own anger simmered beneath the surface. She wanted to rage, to scream at the unfairness of it all, but she forced herself to remain calm. Jalen needed reassurance, not her own raw emotion. She held him tight, breathing in the scent of his hair, the familiar smell of sunshine and freshly cut grass. "It's not fair, Jalen," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "It's not fair, but it's true." She pulled back slightly, cupping his face in her hands. "Your daddy and I, we've always told you, right? We've told you about how some people judge others by the color of their skin, not by the content of their character." Jalen nodded silently, his eyes fixed on hers. He'd heard those words before, abstract concepts discussed at the dinner table, stories from history books. But now, they weren't just words anymore. They were a lived experience, a sharp, stinging reality that had pierced the bubble of his childhood innocence. He thought of the security officers, the way they'd looked at him, initially wary, then slowly softening as they realized he posed no threat. Even in that small act of understanding, there was a sting of injustice. Why should he have to prove his innocence in the first place? "It's like they saw me and they didn't see me," Jalen said slowly, the words catching in his throat. "They saw something else." Tasha's heart ached at his words. He'd captured the essence of it, the insidious nature of prejudice, the way it reduced individuals to stereotypes, erasing their individuality, their humanity. "Yes, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "That's exactly it." The room fell silent again, the hum of the air conditioner a constant, droning reminder of the world outside, a world that could be both beautiful and cruel. Tasha held Jalen close, offering him the silent comfort of her presence. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, a poignant reminder of the day that had begun with such promise and ended with such a bitter lesson. As darkness crept in, Tasha knew that this conversation was far from over. It was a conversation that would continue, woven into the fabric of their lives, a constant reminder of the challenges they faced and the unwavering love that would bind them together through it all. The muted Arizona sun filtered through the flimsy hotel curtains, painting stripes across Tasha Porter's face, as she scrolled through the news on her phone. The residual tension from the previous day, the airport, the security officers, the bewildered hurt in Jalen's eyes still coiled tight in her chest. A sharp inhale hitched in her throat. An alert flashed across her screen. Breaking! White House announces retired Air Force Colonel Dr. Emory Porter as new FAA administrator. Her hand trembled slightly. Emory? FAA administrator? He hadn't mentioned anything about a final interview, let alone an appointment. She reread the headline, each word a small, electric shock. This was huge. It was sudden, unexpected, and utterly bewilderingly perfect. A strange mix of elation and a lingering unease warred within her. One hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. This could change everything. Not just for Emory, for their family, but for Jalen. Jalen, honey, come look at this, she called, her voice slightly breathless. She could hear the soft whirring of his handheld airplane model as he maneuvered it through the air, the gentle whoosh of familiar soundtrack to their lives. Jalen, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in their world, continued his aerial acrobatics. The small plastic plane dipped and soared, mimicking the graceful dance of the real giants he so adored. Each movement reflected his quiet, focused intensity, his unwavering fascination. The incident yesterday, the confusion and hurt, seemed to momentarily fade into the background, replaced by the familiar comfort of his passion. He paused his play, setting the model carefully on the bedside table, the miniature landing gear clicking softly against the polished wood. "What is it, Mom?" he asked, approaching her. His eyes, still holding a shadow of yesterday's confusion, met hers. The raw vulnerability in his gaze tugged at her heart. She held out her phone, the headlines still glowing brightly. "Read this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He took the phone, his brow furrowing slightly as he scanned the text. Breaking! White House announces retired Air Force Colonel Dr. Emory Porter as new FAA administrator. He looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Wait, that's Dad." The words hung in the air, a fragile bubble of disbelief. A slow smile spread across his face, replacing the lingering uncertainty with a dawning wonder. "Dad at the FA?" He repeated the words, as if testing their weight, their reality. Tasha watched as a multitude of emotions flickered across his features: surprise, confusion, and then a slow, burgeoning joy. The news, so unexpected, so monumental, seemed to wash over him in waves. It was as if the injustice of the previous day, the weight of being unfairly singled out, began to lift, replaced by a fragile hope. He glanced back at his model airplane, the miniature wings gleaming in the sunlight. A silent conversation seemed to pass between the boy and the small aircraft, a shared dream, a whispered promise. The FAA, his father, airplanes, all the disparate pieces of his world suddenly clicked into place, forming a new, exciting pattern. Tasha's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. This was more than just a prestigious appointment. It was a symbol, a beacon of hope. She had spent the night replaying the events at the airport, the casual dismissal of Jalen's passion, the suspicion in the pilot's eyes. It had felt like a cold slap, a stark reminder of the invisible barriers that still stood in their way. But now this felt like a victory, a quiet defiance against the unspoken prejudices that had cast a shadow over their lives. "This is amazing, Jalen," she whispered, pulling him into a hug. He clung to her, the small plane still clutched in his hand. The plastic felt cool against her cheek. She felt a tremor run through him, a quiet vibration of excitement. He pulled back slightly, his eyes shining with a renewed light. "This means Dad can change things, right?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question, so innocent, so full of hope, pierced her heart. "Yes, baby," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. "He can change things." She smoothed his hair, her fingers lingering on his temple. The appointment was more than a professional accomplishment. It was a personal triumph, a validation of their family, of their dreams. It was a chance to rewrite the narrative, to challenge the assumptions, to create a world where a young black boy's love for airplanes wouldn't be met with suspicion, but with encouragement. The rhythmic knock on the door startled them. Emery stood there, a tired but triumphant smile etched on his face. He held up a newspaper, the headline mirroring the one on Tasha's phone. "I see you've heard the news," he said, his voice laced with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. He looked at Jalen, his eyes filled with a father's quiet pride. "Son, looks like we're going to Washington." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, the outside world momentarily shut out. In that small, sun-drenched hotel room, a new chapter began, one filled with both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of dreams taking flight. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a shimmering glow over the assembled crowd. The air, thick with anticipation, buzzed with hushed conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes. Tasha Porter smoothed the fabric of her dress, the silk cool against her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from her son's hand clasped tightly in hers. Jalen, usually so animated, sat unusually still, his gaze fixed on the stage. A week had passed since the incident at the airport. A week of media frenzy, of hushed phone calls, of her husband's unwavering calm amidst the storm. Tasha inhaled deeply, trying to quell the tremor in her chest. She'd never imagined this. Her husband, Emery, the man who meticulously organized his sock drawer by shade of gray, was now about to be sworn in as the administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. It was a bittersweet victory, a triumph tinged with a lingering sting of injustice. She glanced at Emery on the sidelines, poised and composed, as though addressing a room full of dignitaries about aviation safety was something he did every Tuesday. The irony was not lost on her. The very organization meant to ensure the safety and accessibility of air travel had, in a way, failed her son. The thought sent a familiar wave of anger through her, a sharp, bitter taste at the back of her throat. But then Jalen squeezed her hand, and she looked down at him. His eyes, wide and dark, reflected the stage lights, but held a quiet strength that belied his 12 years. He'd faced the scrutiny, the whispers, the blatant stares with a dignity she couldn't fathom. It was in moments like these that she realized perhaps she was the one who needed protecting. The polite applause died down as the Secretary of Transportation stepped up to the podium. The room fell silent, the collective breath held in anticipation. Tasha felt Jalen shift beside her, his small body vibrating with a nervous energy she recognized as his own brand of excitement. The secretary's voice, amplified by the speakers, filled the room, praising Emery's qualifications, his dedication, his vision for the future of American aviation. Each word felt like a validation, a small measure of justice against the backdrop of the previous week's events. But even as a part of her rejoiced, another part remained guarded, a quiet voice whispering in the back of her mind. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Emery took the oath of office, his voice firm and resonant, his hand raised in solemn promise. Tasha watched him, a wave of pride washing over her, so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. He'd always been a quiet force, a man of few words but unwavering conviction. She knew this moment, this responsibility, wouldn't change him. It would simply give him a larger platform to be the man he already was. As Emery stepped up to the podium to deliver his acceptance speech, Jalen's grip on her hand tightened. The hush in the room deepened. The collective gaze of hundreds of eyes focused on the man who now held the reins of American aviation. "I stand before you today, humbled and honored by the trust placed in me," Emery began, his voice steady and clear. He spoke of his vision for the FAA, of the importance of safety and innovation, his words carefully chosen, each syllable carrying the weight of his new responsibility. Tasha observed the audience, their expressions a mixture of polite interest and professional detachment. She wondered how many of them knew the story behind the man on stage, the private struggle that lay beneath the polished veneer of his public persona. Then, Emery paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Jalen. Tasha felt her breath catch in her throat. She knew what was coming. A week ago, he continued, his voice softening, my son was stopped at an airport. He was 12 years old. He loves airplanes. A ripple went through the audience, a collective intake of breath. Tasha felt Jalen stiffen beside her. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was simply watching planes take off, feeding a passion that I, as his father, have always encouraged. Emery's voice held a quiet strength, a controlled emotion that resonated through the room. A pilot saw him, a young black boy standing alone, and assumed the worst. She called security. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the click of cameras capturing the moment. Tasha's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the hushed room. This incident, Emery continued, his gaze still fixed on Jalen, has been a painful but necessary reminder of the biases that exist in our society, the assumptions we make based on appearances, on fear, on the stories we tell ourselves about who is safe and who is a threat. He paused again, letting his words hang in the air. But this moment, right now, is proof that the same boy who was once treated like a threat is the same boy sitting in the front row as I take this position. And that matters. His words, simple yet profound, hung in the air, charged with an unspoken power. Tasha felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of pride and relief so overwhelming it threatened to spill over. She squeezed Jalen's hand, and he squeezed back, his small hand warm and reassuring in hers. In that moment, surrounded by the hushed awe of the crowd, the clicking cameras, and the weight of unspoken words, Tasha felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new, something better. The Albuquerque sun, a harsh, bleached gold, slanted through the gap in the heavy hotel curtains, painting a stripe across the worn carpet. Meredith Langford sat perched on the edge of the bed, the remote clutched loosely in her hand. The television screen flickered, the sound muted, showing a man in a crisp dark suit standing at a podium. His face, serious and composed, was vaguely familiar. A name scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Dr. Emery Porter, new FAA administrator. Porter. The name echoed in the quiet room, a dissonant chord striking against the fragile peace she'd been trying to cultivate. Porter. Jalen Porter. The boy at the airport. The boy she had reported. A wave of nausea rolled over her, a sickening lurch that tightened her chest and made her breath catch in her throat. She hadn't connected the names before, hadn't even considered the possibility. She'd been too wrapped up in her own swirling vortex of shame and self-recrimination to consider the wider implications. She told herself it was a simple mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment, a product of heightened security, of the ever-present undercurrent of fear that permeated air travel these days. But now, looking at the man on the screen, his face radiating quiet strength and intelligence, the flimsy justification she had constructed crumbled around her, leaving her exposed and raw. She unmuted the television, Dr. Porter's voice filling the room, measured and calm, speaking about safety and innovation, about the future of air travel. His words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with an irony she couldn't escape. How could she, in her single impulsive act, have compromised the very principles this man now stood for? He spoke of inclusivity, of making the skies accessible to everyone. And the image of Jalen's small, bewildered face flashed in her mind, the unspoken question in his eyes. The airport, the sterile lights, the security officers looming over him. The boy's quiet dignity in the face of unwarranted suspicion. The memory burned like acid, etching itself deeper into her conscience with every word Dr. Porter spoke. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to quell the throbbing headache that was building. What had she done? Not just to the boy, but to his family, to this man, to everything he represented. She'd reduced him, even if unintentionally, to a statistic, a stereotype. She'd perpetuated the very biases she claimed to abhor. The air in the room felt suddenly thick and suffocating. She rose abruptly, pacing the small space, the rhythmic thud of her steps against the carpet a counterpoint to the steady cadence of Dr. Porter's voice. She needed to do something, anything, to alleviate the crushing weight of guilt that threatened to consume her. But what? An apology? To whom? To the boy? To his father? Would an apology even be enough? Could words ever undo the damage she had caused? The thought of facing them, of seeing the hurt and disappointment in their eyes, was almost unbearable. She had envisioned herself as a protector, a guardian of the skies. But in reality, she had become the very thing she feared, a perpetuator of injustice, a symbol of the systemic biases that plague the world. She stopped pacing, her gaze fixed on the television screen. Dr. Porter was nearing the end of his speech, his voice rising slightly in emphasis. He spoke of the need for understanding, for bridging divides, for building a future where everyone felt safe and welcome. His words resonated deeply within her, a painful reminder of the chasm that separated her intentions from her actions. She reached for her phone, her hand trembling slightly. She had to do something. She had to try to make amends. But the screen remained blank, the contact list a blur of names and numbers. Who did she call? How did she even begin to explain? The weight of her actions pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. She closed her eyes, drawing a deep, shaky breath. The silence in the room was broken only by the muffled sounds from the television. Dr. Porter's voice, now fading, seemed to echo in her mind, a constant reminder of the damage she had caused. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the flickering screen. She had a long way to go, a difficult path ahead. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she had to try. She had to find a way to make things right, not just for Jalen and his family, but for herself. The journey wouldn't be easy, but it was a journey she had to take. The sterile scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the jet fuel and ozone that usually permeated Meredith's world. The regional FAA office near Oklahoma City felt a universe away from the cockpit, a place of cold, hard facts and bureaucratic procedure. Each tick of the clock on the wall seemed to amplify the tremor in her hands. She smoothed down the crisp fabric of her uniform, the familiar gesture offering little comfort. He'll see right through me, she thought, her stomach churning with a nauseating blend of shame and dread. He'll see the fear, the prejudice, the woman who almost ruined his son's life. Dr. Emery Porter entered the room with a quiet authority that belied the storm brewing within him. He moved with a measured grace, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. A small, polite smile played on his lips, but Meredith saw the weariness in his eyes, the subtle tightening of his jaw. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the silence stretching between them thick with unspoken words. Meredith sank into the chair, the vinyl cold against her skin. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, every flaw magnified, every imperfection laid bare. The antiseptic environment seemed to amplify her guilt, stripping away the bravado she usually wore like armor. "Captain Langford," Dr. Porter began, his voice calm and even, yet somehow holding the weight of the situation, "thank you for coming." The formality of his words, the very fact that he addressed her by her title, felt like a condemnation. He's drawing a line, she realized, a flicker of panic rising in her chest. He's reminding me of the authority I abused. "Dr. Porter," she managed, her voice a strained whisper. She cleared her throat, tried to regain some semblance of composure. "I wanted to apologize. In person." Her carefully rehearsed words felt hollow, inadequate in the face of the harm she had caused. He's heard 1,000 apologies like this before, she thought, a wave of despair washing over her. Empty words from people who don't understand. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I appreciate that." The simplicity of his response disarmed her. There was no accusation in his tone, no hint of the anger she expected. It was the very absence of these things that cut her deeper than any recrimination could have. She took a shaky breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "I didn't know who he was," she began, the words tumbling out in a rush. I saw a kid sitting alone near the restricted area, and I assumed something was wrong. The silence that followed her confession was heavy, pregnant with unspoken judgment. Meredith could hear the frantic thump of her own heart, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the sterile room. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to disappear. "You didn't question your own assumption," Dr. Porter said, his voice soft, yet piercingly clear. "You didn't ask. You didn't wonder. You just pointed." Each word landed like a blow, chipping away at the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't ranting. Yet his words held more power than any outburst. He was dissecting her actions, laying bare the unconscious bias that had driven her. Meredith opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. She saw no anger in his eyes, only a profound sadness, a weariness that mirrored her own. It was the look of a man who had seen too much, endured too much. And in that moment, she understood. She understood the weight of her actions, the ripple effect of her fear. "I know," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, hot and stinging against her cheeks. "I know, and I'm so sorry." It wasn't the polished, professional apology she had practiced. It was the raw, unfiltered cry of a woman grappling with her own shortcomings. It was the confession of someone finally confronting the darkness within themselves. Dr. Porter remained silent for a moment, his gaze holding hers. Then, he reached across the desk, his hand hovering over hers. He didn't touch her, but the gesture itself spoke volumes. It was an offering, a bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding. "Captain Langford," he said, his voice gentle, "this isn't just about my son. This is about every child who has been unfairly judged, every dream that has been stifled by fear and prejudice." His words resonated deep within her, a stark reminder of the larger context of her actions. It wasn't just about Jalen. It was about a system that allowed such biases to flourish, a system that needed to change. "Understand," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Do you?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. "Do you understand the weight of that responsibility?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Meredith knew he wasn't just asking about her individual responsibility. He was asking about the collective responsibility of a society grappling with its own demons. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I think I'm beginning to." It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was an honest one. It was the first step on a long and difficult journey toward understanding, toward atonement, toward change. The silence that followed was different this time. It wasn't filled with tension or judgment. It was the quiet of shared understanding, the fragile beginning of a dialogue that needed to be had. It was the flicker of hope in the sterile room, a promise of a future where assumptions were challenged and where fear gave way to understanding. The afternoon sun, a hazy gold through the living room window, cast long shadows across the worn rug. Dust motes danced in the light, a silent ballet Jalen barely registered. He sat hunched over the kitchen table, the creamy white envelope clutched between his fingers. His thumb traced the looping cursive of the return address, a script so different from the Stark, typed labels on his airplane magazines. It was hers, Captain Langford's. He hadn't wanted to open it. Part of him, the bruised part that still flinched at the memory of the airport security's skeptical gaze, wanted to tear it to shreds, to erase the whole incident from his mind. But another part, a smaller, more persistent voice, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was something in those folded pages that he needed to hear. He'd stared at the envelope for a full hour, the silence of the house pressing in on him. His mother, Tasha, had placed it beside his plate at lunch, her hand lingering on his shoulder for a moment, a silent offering of support. He knew she wouldn't push. She understood, as only a mother could, the delicate ecosystem of a 12-year-old boy's emotions. He finally slid his finger under the flap, the paper tearing with a soft rip that echoed in the quiet. The scent of vanilla, faint but distinct, wafted from the letter. He unfolded the single sheet, the cursive script flowing across the page. It was an apology, a real one, not the carefully worded, legally vetted statements issued by the airline, but something raw and vulnerable. She wrote about her own childhood, her fascination with flight, her fear of jeopardizing her career. She wrote about the moment she saw him, the automatic, unconscious assumptions that flooded her mind, assumptions she recognized now as rooted in prejudice. She confessed her shame, her deep regret for the pain she had caused him. Jalen reread the letter, each word searing itself into his memory. He felt a strange mix of emotions swirling within him. Anger, a familiar heat that tightened his chest, still lingered. But something else was taking root, a fragile tendril of understanding. He thought about the pilot, alone in the cockpit, thousands of feet above the ground, her life entrusted to complex machinery and intricate protocols. He imagined the pressure, the constant vigilance, the ever-present awareness of potential threats. He realized, with a sudden clarity that surprised him, that her mistake, however egregious, wasn't born of malice, but of fear. A misplaced, misguided fear, but fear nonetheless. He thought of his own fear, the fear that had gripped him as the security officers approached, the fear that his passion, his pure, unadulterated love for airplanes, would be forever tainted by this incident. The rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway broke the silence. He folded the letter, the vanilla scent still lingering, and tucked it back into the envelope. He got up from the table, the sunlight warm on his face, and walked to his room. The walls, plastered with posters of aircraft, from vintage biplanes to sleek, modern jets, were a testament to his enduring fascination. He ran his fingers over the smooth surface of a model Concorde, the elegant lines a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. He'd spent hours meticulously assembling it, each piece a symbol of his dream, a dream of soaring above the clouds, of pushing the boundaries of human ingenuity. He opened his desk drawer, his fingers brushing against a worn copy of Stick and Rudder, his grandfather's well-loved guide to the art of flying. He placed the letter inside. The creamy white envelope nestled amongst the dog-eared pages, a stark reminder of the obstacles he might face, the prejudices he might encounter on his journey. He closed the drawer, the soft click echoing in the room, a sound that marked a quiet resolution. He wouldn't let this incident define him. He wouldn't let it extinguish the fire that burned within him, the unwavering desire to touch the sky. He heard his mother's footsteps in the hallway. She paused at his door, her hand hovering over the knob. "Jalen," she called softly, her voice laced with concern. He turned, a small smile playing on his lips. "I'm okay, Mom," he said, his voice steady, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm keeping it," he added, gesturing towards the desk, "but I'm still flying." The words hung in the air, a declaration of resilience, a testament to the enduring power of dreams. Tasha's eyes, usually bright with laughter, held a depth of emotion that mirrored his own. She knew, without needing to ask, what he meant. She knew that the letter, the apology, the entire incident had become a part of him, a scar that would fade with time, but never truly disappear. But she also knew, with a mother's unwavering certainty, that it wouldn't break him. It would only make him stronger. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his strength, and quietly closed the door, leaving him alone with his dreams and the quiet hum of the afternoon sun.